This week on Great Chat, with Figma's blockbuster IPO last week, we couldn't help but wonder, are we so back? This week, we reflect on our shared IPO journeys, what it's really like to be on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange on the day of the big board debut. I'm Sally, and I'm joined by Angela, Ashley, and Helen. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by over 200,000 companies to simplify their finances. We're huge Mercury fans at Great Chat, and we use it to run this podcast. A few of us are also current customers of the funds, startups, not to mention dozens of founders we've backed as VCs, angels, and scouts that run their businesses on Mercury. If you're launching a startup or a fund, visit mercury.com to apply online in 10 minutes or less. The onboarding couldn't be more intuitive or delightful. Quick note, Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. For more details, check out the show notes.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello,
Can you guys believe that it's already August? Where did summer go?
Denial.
Did we ever get like a summer song of the summer? We did not get one this summer, right?
Blackpink, Jump. I thought that was the anthem.
I don't even know.
Summer.
I've never heard that. Ashley, have you heard of Blackpink Jump?
I know who Blackpink is. I feel like I find out what the song of the summer is in the fall every year.
Gosh.
So,
Ladies.
Yeah.
I know Angela knows.
Honestly, my summer has just been the Backstreet Boys. Like, that's just my social media feed is just nonstop videos of the Backstreet Boys, and I keep consuming that content. But speaking of, I was just in a group chat with a friend whose sister was on a flight back from LA from the concert, and AJ from the Backstreet Boys was sitting right next to her, and she was like furiously texting, like, do I say something? Do I tap him on the shoulder?
Was he in coach?
He was, we think it was like, yes. Well, first
Economy
of all,
Plus.
First of all, he's like
Economy
commercial,
Plus.
so he's like a man of the people. You know, he really cares about the environment. Otherwise, he'd be flying private.
I think the tour revenue just hasn't like kicked in yet. By the end of the tour, he'll be back in first or private, but he's ramping.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys do if you see a celebrity? Are you like I'm gonna hound you for a selfie, or do you play it cool?
I play it awkward.
I generally like to leave like famous people alone unless I feel like I have something like interesting to say to them. Otherwise, I'm just letting them be. Angela, I feel like you would want to say something.
I just feel like, well, she was also saying that, like, you know, everyone's a little, like, you know, hungover from the weekend, and they were like, you know, the back of the plane was singing, like, I want it that way. And I was just like, he missed out on a viral moment. Like, how amazing would it be if he led the whole plane in, like, a sing-along for...
He should have done a selfie with the whole plane, at the very least.
I know, just do it for the gram. Like, that's all I was thinking.
Has anyone seen the OpenAI movie being filmed around San Francisco? Like maybe Sally, like your neighborhood?
No, I think it's mostly in the Mission. I did see that they were filming at Dominique Crenn the other week. So
that's what made me think of you. But like, yeah.
Oh, because I'm so fancy.
Yeah, exactly. You're there all the time. Okay. Yeah, I thought the casting was interesting. I don't really watch anything, so I couldn't recognize anyone other than Andrew Garfield. And he'll just be forever cemented in Social Network. But hey, if Andrew Garfield and Social Network is still relevant, then so is my tech career. So yeah.
I feel like this is maybe one of the few times where the actors that play the real people are younger. It's like usually flipped, or it's like, you know, a 25-year-old playing a high schooler. And now I think they're like, you know, like 30-year-olds playing.
That's a good point.
Not 30-year-olds.
But is some of that because they're like going back in time? Like maybe they need people who can have some range.
Who's playing Sam Bankman-Fried in the new movie?
I don't know. I feel like also that storyline, like no one cares anymore.
I agree with you. And then I saw the photo of Andrew Garfield in his Sam Altman costume, and for a second I thought, I was like, oh, is this the SBF movie? And then I got all confused. So that's why I was asking.
Is the costume just a Patagonia jacket?
Yeah. So we're on week 2 of Figma IPO vibes. And the vibes are still good. I have not seen the takedown pieces yet.
You look at all the coverage of Figma, everyone decided to go back to traditional news for IPO day. So I thought that was kind of interesting and notable.
Yeah, I think traditional news still really like reigns supreme. Like, yeah, I mean, Sally, we should talk about what that's actually like on the at the stock exchange, because you've had that experience. I've had it on the PR side, and it's very much like a traditional news bonanza. But it really felt like kind of a comeback for traditional media. I mean, TBPN was there and streaming live, but I like the stuff that I saw was much more from Bloomberg and CNBC.
But doesn't
And
that make sense? If you're going public, right? Like you want everyday Americans to buy the stock, and so thinking about the channels that like people outside the bubble would listen to or watch.
100%. Your audience is not on Twitter for that, right? Like that is, it's kind of a perfect reminder of what a bubble we're in, especially when we're talking about like going direct and a lot of the sort of media trends within tech.
The funny thing to me about week 2 of the Figma story is, speaking of narratives, how quickly the narrative has shifted from like everything in VC is broken, the social contract is broken, nothing works anymore, to like things still work in VC, like look at Figma, everything is okay. So the vibes are vibing positively as we head into the end of summer.
Totally. Also, it validates like multi-billion-dollar fund sizes too, right? Like you can believe how you can return funds that large when you have Figma was, I forget what its ultimate market cap was on day one, but like as of yesterday, it was 56 billion. So the maths.
Since all anyone in tech or finance can talk about is the Figma IPO these days, maybe we can take our conversation from last week and dig a little bit deeper. I mean, it's been a really long time since there have been any IPO, so everybody was really excited for Figma. And I mean, it would have done well in any market, but they literally couldn't have timed it better. I remember like in our group chat, I was saying like Meta just reported and like beat earnings like up 12%, which I mean, it's like, you know, a $4 trillion company or something. These companies don't move like that. And Microsoft was up. So literally like the mood was like risk on, accelerate. And then the next morning Figma prices, like there's literally, it's out of a movie script. The company couldn't have asked for a better setup. And frankly, it's just like a clean VC story that everyone can get around. Like we had CoreWeave, which is more of an infrastructure AI play, but had a complicated capital structure. We had Chime, that was an unprofitable consumer fintech company. And then we had Circle, which was crypto. So, you know, we had like strong IPOs, but they had a little bit of hair on them. And this is the first one that people can really look to and talk about what it means for the rest of the portfolio that people have. So I think that's why it's been so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said this last week, but like the Almost acquisition and the breakup fee was actually like, in my opinion, like I think that was a really important piece of like the financing being clean, them like really cleaning up their unit economics post breakup fee. That I just feel like when you compare the amount of money raised versus a lot of other sort of unicorn darlings that started around the time that they did and, you know, went through their like hyper growth period around the same time, like the numbers just look really good.
And the narrative was so good, right? Like we were all rooting for Figma because there was this like very clear, you know, the peak of the Adobe acquisition, which was so massive at the time, the trauma of that like falling apart, and then such a good like redemption story. And then to have that redemption arc coupled with like beautiful metrics, and to Angela's point, like great market timing, it really was sort of like the perfect IPO.
I think also just like Dylan Fields as a CEO, he's always been this like steady horse, a huge champion to his customers. I've met him a few times, and I think like you guys have as well. And so there was not a single like bad thing people could say about him, and it really resonated in the product. And I think there was someone pointed out that like someone was like sending like product feedback, that and Dylan on IPO day was like responding to a product feedback while he was on the floor celebrating. And you know, till the end, he was even during the busiest time and most exciting time, he was thinking about the product. Maybe this is also a good time for me to maybe just explain what happens behind the scenes on IPO day for on the media side, because I feel like people kind of get like a very narrow lens into the day, but it's usually weeks in the making, and I mean it in terms of CNBC coverage. Obviously, TBPN was on the floor, and it's a lot of like strategy game on the day of. So I've covered a bunch of IPOs, including Facebook, which Helen and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about, Uber, Lyft, Ferrari, pretty much like all the major consumer tech companies from 2016, 2017. We also covered Box. And I think some of the things that are kind of interesting is behind the scenes, there's a lot of coordination between media companies and the companies that are going public. From, for example, when Uber went public and when Alibaba went public, the CEOs and the executives spend a lot of time behind the scenes with the newsroom. So this is not just one reporter. This is editor-in-chief all the way down to the reporter, the producer, the editor, because everyone's going to be covering from various angles. So they want to be able to have this room and space to ask the conversations and for the companies to really portray the narrative that they want to portray on the day of. And then to develop a relationship and understand. And then maybe the day of, or even like around pricing, if news comes out, that there's a quick direct channel for people to coordinate. So I used to cover IPOs from Squawk on the Street, which is from 9 a.m. to noon, which is in the like heart of IPO window. So as you guys know, 9:30 is when the bell rings. So that's like the exciting celebratory moment. Ashley, I'm going to put up a photo of you on the balcony for the Box IPO. The way that it used to happen was they would ring the bell, there's all the celebration, and then we wait for the stock to open. And then when it opens, it's again that moment, and then they go on CNBC, and then they go on Bloomberg and other platforms to do an interview to talk about the stock reaction. That actually, an interesting point, has changed because some stocks don't open at the price point or the like exciting pop that they anticipate. So there's all this risk about, do you want to wait until the IPO opens for them to interview, or is it a safer bet to do it before the stock? So all this stuff is all just kind of like strategy, which, just watching the Figma IPO just was bringing me back to those exciting days, which again, like at both New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, really exciting time. Helen, I'm curious, I think you were at Facebook campus during the IPO. I was at the NASDAQ that time. That was one of the like crazier, probably the craziest, my memory of IPO.
Wait, were
days.
you on the Facebook campus too?
I was at the NASDAQ where the bell.
I know, but NASDAQ came to Facebook for the IPO, which I think is like part of why everything was so messy.
Yeah, and we were inside the NASDAQ as like the satellite of the IPO. And for those who don't, well, Helen, why don't you tell the story of?
Yeah, so Facebook filed their S1 in like February, I think 2012, and then went public in May. And to experience everything as like your first IPO and not be somebody who like studied IPO or ever worked in finance, like you're just like, oh, I guess this is normal. I guess this. So like NASDAQ actually like came to Facebook's campus, and the whole like opening sort of thing, like Ashley, the picture of you on the podium, we all got to like do that, which is funny. But actually, to Zuck's credit, not to like go down memory lane too much, he gave like a roaring speech about how this is just the start and that this is not, signifying the end of anything. And so we had a hackathon the night before, meaning like everybody was at the office, like creating new projects and working on cool stuff. Hackathons are how a lot of products were born. And, so we were there at 5:00 in the morning or whatever, when all of the stuff started to come together and no one had slept, and it was super exciting. But like the Facebook IPO, I think for most people is something that is memorable because like it kind of flopped. Like there were these tech issues, there were comms issues, and I believe it opened at 38. Like that number is burned into memory forever. But then like it fell, it did not do what Figma is doing right now. And I think it was the largest tech IPO to date at the time. And so for it to not, go really smoothly, I think was sort of like a widespread panic.
I would say I think people forget because you go on your Fidelity or Robinhood and you put in a trade, like you think that there's like infinite supply and you can just buy whatever, but there are a finite number of shares, and it's literally like you have to take all of the orders for people that want to buy and all of the orders for people that want to sell, and you have to match that. And that's what Sally and Helen mean when they say like they're waiting for the stock to open, because like you have to actually balance the book, and if things are too imbalanced or things happen, like that process takes a long time. So people are like, oh, what do you pay bankers for? What are they doing? They're literally on the phone with these two sides, like calling, trying to figure it out.
Like very old school.
Very
Yeah.
old school. And so I think it's like you're literally taking orders, and I think it can go either way. Like you said, for Facebook, it went one way, and for Figma, it's going another way. But I think it's important to remember that I think the cohort of IPOs from like 2020, 2021, they're down like 40 to 50% from where they priced. And so for all these institutional long-term investors, they have a lot of scar tissue for IPO pricing. And so if you're in this newer cohort and you want the Fidelities and you want the T Rows and you want the long-term shareholders, you have to price it attractively so that there's a return for them committing their capital in the IPO, which I think is just like interesting context, as there's, tweets and articles about whether the banks fumbled it. I'm not saying they did or they didn't, but that's like certainly a consideration. And I think the other just aspect that people may not think about is in the IPO, there's only like a small percentage of the company that's actually going, the shares are actually being made available to the public. I think for Figma, it was like 10% or something like that. And so the supply is very constrained. And when everyone's cheering for Figma and everyone wants to buy a Figma, there's like unlimited demand on this side. And so it creates like all of these interesting like reactions in the stock price, which is hard to read into initially. So that's why you saw the stock go up 200% and then like fall 30%. It's just a lot of that short-term retail action, which is again why the company doesn't want to price it so perfectly, because when you expose yourself to all that retail investing, your stock becomes a lot more volatile, and you want that stable base of investors.
Well, Angela, I actually have a question. There was the sort of, I think there's a normal chatter. Every time there's a big jump, there's the Bill Gurley line of like, this is why, pricing IPOs is so inefficient. But then I felt like there was a sort of comeback from that narrative where Dylan was really looking for long-term investors. And that's why like the delta made sense. Can you unpack that a little bit? Like, what does he mean by like specifically looking for long-term investors so that the value would hold?
Yeah, as you guys talked about, there's sort of two steps of the sequencing, right? And actually, all three of you, Ashley, you experience this box as well. But before you sort of like list on the stock exchange, you actually get your anchor investors in, and sort of all of that allocation is decided upon and priced. And so those investors are taking a risk because they don't know where it's going to open. And so you want to give them an attractive enough price to like commit their capital up front. And as I was saying, there was like all this scar tissue from IPOs just being so hyped and priced too high that all of these mutual funds and long-only investors got really burned by that pricing. And so what they mean is if you're a Fidelity or a Capital or a Wellington, you're not trading the stock day to day. You're sort of in the stock for a long period of time, sometimes decades, and that creates a lot of stability because there's not a lot of activity in your shareholder base versus like your average retail investor in Robinhood that's like trading the stock like multiple times a day, and it creates all this like chaos. And so there's probably like some middle ground between where it priced and where it opened. But you really want to balance those dynamics out.
Ashley, what was it? What was the decision process for Box? And I don't know if you know the answer or not. Choosing the Nasdaq versus the New York Stock Exchange, because I think that's also there's a fierce competition between the two exchanges, and one is a really iconic old school Wall Street, and then Nasdaq is this like technology center in the heart of Times Square. I think there was a question after the Facebook IPO where people were like, is Nasdaq going to survive?
Yeah, the brand took a hit for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so Box was actually New York Stock Exchange. And I think what you don't see is both of these exchanges are competing behind the scenes to like win customers. And so as soon as you are in that like pre-IPO bucket, they are throwing like incentives at you to pick them. And so I wasn't directly involved in choosing the New York Stock Exchange, but the marketing team at Box was. And I think it was just like some combination of co-marketing budget and like, we'll give you this billboard, we'll do these things for you. And I have a, obviously personal affinity for New York Stock Exchange. I like love the old building, and it's really cool when you do an IPO there. There's this like beautiful room where you get to like have a breakfast. So it's like the employees who are there, the bankers who are there, the early investors who are there. It's really a special thing to do an IPO and to be on site for that. I'm sure everyone saw for Figma, Sequoia was there, like all their investors were there, a bunch of early employees were there. A select few get to go up to that little stage. I think the New York Stock Exchange stage is also kind of like a nicer vibe than NASDAQ. I'm showing my bias here, but it really is kind of like a party, but a party where everyone's so nervous because you don't know how it's going to turn out. And it's funny too, Sally, to your point around like the lag between ringing the bell and then actually like the stock beginning to trade. Like you think of that bell ringing as like the celebratory moment, but after that, then you're just like waiting. And I remember I was very lucky to get to go up onto the little stage, which was like kind of a surreal like career highlight moment, and having so much excitement around that. But then afterwards, you're just kind of like frozen. You're all down there. You're like trying to gauge like how, like what the sentiment is. In Box's case, I think we had priced pretty low. And so there was like a nice like pop of where the stock started trading after, those calls had been made and the price had been figured out. And then a pop from there. So nothing like Figma, but we did have that nice like IPO day trajectory where like everything was up, although not so much that Bill Gurley got mad and tweeted. And then Sally, to your earlier point, we did it the old fashioned way where Aaron went on TV after the stock had priced. And but I think the thing I will say is the thing that a lot of comms people would also say. We had the same messaging, regardless of which way the stock went, whether it had gone down or in our case it went up. It's all very much like future focused, like we're building a company for the long haul. This is our mission, etc. So fortunately, we had the backdrop of a stock that was doing well. But it's the same story regardless. And so, and it's a good moment in time to start to to think that way and to plant those seeds, because the second you're a public company, you have a daily scorecard that does not always make sense based on the value of the business. And so you just have to get used to like living with that sort of volatility and maintaining a long-term view.
Well, I remember the Box IPO vividly as well as a Dropboxer watching extremely closely what might be in our future. And just super quick on the Dropbox IPO, because again, like when you go through your first IPO, you think, oh, this is just the way it always is, right? And the Dropbox IPO could not have been more different than the Facebook IPO. But I think in terms of like pop, right? Like for a while, I joined Dropbox Series D, so it was the $10 billion valuation, and I don't think Dropbox really ever got to that market cap, even after they went public. Like maybe it popped for a day, but sometimes that's the path of a company. And I think Dropbox is doing extremely well right now. Like I think that, over the past 5 or 6 years, like they really cleaned up their unit economics, and I think they have a really strong business. But for a while, especially if your expectations are, oh yeah, everything's going to be just like Facebook, and you join Dropbox at the sort of like height of Dropbox, right? And they have an IPO, it just goes very, very differently. So I don't know. I remember like salivating over the Box IPO.
Well, Helen, I don't know why you were salivating, because the Box IPO was like an absolute roller coaster. I mean, the day of the IPO was great. Like, couldn't have planned it better. The path there was traumatic. Like It was a 10. We were
Every
on,
path. Every path is traumatic.
No. But
Yes,
like that uniquely so. We were on file to go public for 10 months. So actually it's funny because a lot of the IPOs
I do remember this part.
That we have like personally touched are like interconnected, because I think the Facebook IPO actually had a bit of a chilling effect on the IPO market. Like everyone expected Facebook to be this amazing IPO, and then it took a while for Facebook to sort of like, rebuild its story in the public markets. And so when Box originally filed to go public in March 2014, it had been a bit of a drought. Just like up until this year, there had been a pretty significant IPO drought, which meant there was like extra attention and excitement on our IPO, even though we were a relatively small company. I mean, we were valued at like $2 billion in the private markets. We were doing a little over $100 million in revenue, if I'm remembering correctly, and like growing really quickly, but also like very high losses. And so there was like a ton of attention. And then a couple days after we filed to go public, and this is back to Angela's point, like Figma was like a great, obvious IPO and great timing. We were like a small, less obvious, maybe, I'm not going to say not great, less obvious company, and market timing really, really matters when you're smaller, right? Because like the vibes of the IPO markets, you're either riding them up or you're riding them down.
You get swayed.
Totally. And so a couple days after we filed, like the market, like the bottom fell out for high growth, high loss SaaS stocks. Like, and we became, because we were on, like there was so much attention on Box, we became the poster company for that market correction. And it was wild for me because Box, enterprise software company, not as buzzy as like, a lot of the consumer contemporaries. Like our narrative had really been up and to the right. And so when we became the poster company for like the end of like growth at all costs, and it was pretty brutal. And just like I think tech right now is celebrating Figma, not just for Figma, but for Figma like reopening the IPO window, like in a, like Chime was like a toe dip, and now Figma's like a full on we're back baby. I think like people resented Box for not being a successful IPO story, because that has implications for the broader market. And it was so volatile for our category that we could not kick off our roadshow. Like we kept delaying it and punting it. And then the other thing that happened was Alibaba. Like there were whispers that Alibaba was going to go public, and they ultimately did in September of 2014. And when if you're a small company and there's a big IPO coming, you don't want to try to go out ahead of that, because everyone's saving their ammunition for this like much bigger market moment. And so we had to keep like punting on the Box IPO. We actually did like a mini earnings where we like released our quarterly numbers while we were on file to go public, which was like, I think like a pretty bold move. And it ended up being really important, because when we filed to go public, you literally couldn't see how Box's trajectory would change to becoming like profitable down the line. And like our story got better as the year went on. But yeah, it was wild. It was wild to have to sort of like rebuild trust and rebuild our narrative while in a quiet period, and with this like constantly kicking the can in terms of when we would go public. And we finally did in January of 2015. So almost a full year later. So Box's IPO was very, very hard won. But it was funny. I do remember like on IPO day, feeling so grateful for that and feeling so ready to be public, because we had been put through the ringer. And it was just a good reminder that like, this is just, actually I saw Kirsten Green did an interview where she called an IPO like your Series A of being a public company. Like it's like your sort of first big milestone. And really like being a public company is actually like way harder than going public in a lot of ways. And so maybe the upside or the silver lining of a tough IPO is you're more ready for that scrutiny, and your whole company is more ready for that scrutiny, because it can be kind of a tough adjustment.
It's also amazing the companies we just talked about, all the founders are still CEOs as publicly traded companies. Mark
Yeah,
Zuckerberg,
that's awesome.
Aaron Levy and Drew Houston. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear about like the narrative and thinking about public versus private. I think the other debate that Figma brought up was, does this mean that more like late stage private companies now go public versus stay private forever? And Ashley, you touched on like one of the trade-offs, which is like the sunlight and the like sunshine from being under scrutiny in the public markets is a really difficult thing to manage. I think the other consideration for companies is really like long-term strategic planning. And I remember for the Uber IPO, there was a lot of concern about like $1 billion of spend on other projects. And so they spun off a lot of the divisions, including ATG, which was their autonomous unit. And like that was celebrated at the time of IPO because like you removed all these costs. And now,
Oh yeah.
6 years later, it's become like the existential question of like Uber doesn't have, an autonomous play. And like, I'm not saying ATG would have gone there or not gone there, but just from a strategic
Totally.
perspective.
I mean, I think all those side businesses, or what was thought of as the non-core business, is what made Uber like continue on their growth trajectory. So yeah, but I do remember. I mean, like Lyft took such a different path, right? Like they did not invest in all of these other businesses. So I feel like now hindsight's 2020, but yeah.
The one IPO that everyone feels confident about is Canva. I'm sure you guys have seen the comparisons to Figma.
Yeah,
They are
people
like
are very
similar
excited
companies.
about Canva.
Yeah, in the design space. And Canva is, I think, actually even growing a little faster, even though it's a much larger business. And so Figma IPO has gotten people salivating over Canva. There's one more point I want to make on the Figma IPO that I think is like so important, which is that the simplicity of narrative is something that is stress tested so hard in an IPO. And I thought Figma did a beautiful job with this. Like their mantra was design goes public. They didn't have some super complex messaging around like, actually, we serve more than designers. And, like I'm a Figma user. They like kept it really, really simple. And I think in the absence of that, the public audience is going to default to like the lowest common denominator story. And so if you can pick something that is like really crisp, really clear, really graspable, you can control that narrative, and otherwise you're going to lose control of it. And I say that from a place of having experiences personally. I think we were too cute with Box's messaging. We wanted to make sure people knew we were a platform and collaboration and not just content. And what we ended up getting was like online storage as like the way people were describing us, which is like, oh no, that's such a commodity. And so should we head over to Q&A? I love the question that we got this week, and I'm so excited to hear everyone's answers. What is a failed product that was ahead of its time?
I mean, I wouldn't call it a failed product, but I mean, Helen, you probably remember, but like, do you guys remember when Newsfeed first came out in like 2006? Like everybody hated it. Like the internet was up in arms.
Bring back the old Facebook.
Yes.
1 million strong.
Like our privacy is invaded. Like, why is this here? And then like he just forced it to become a thing. And now I don't think we can imagine like our online lives without news feeds. Yeah.
Ashley, what do you think?
Okay, I have a couple. The first is really dorky, but I was at a dinner the other night and someone mentioned like casually being on WebEx with their team. And I was like, what? Like, does WebEx still exist? And it was just a reminder of like a technology that had been around. Like WebEx like owned video conferencing for so long, and then just somehow completely missed the black swan moment of COVID, which was what, of course, catapulted Zoom into, I mean, talk about stock price, but like also just like ubiquitous use. And when I think about like it's like Zoom and then it's Google Meet, and then every now and then someone makes me get on Microsoft Teams, but I didn't even know that WebEx was still in the picture. And so that's like, talk about like missing the big moment. But maybe a more interesting one to think through is one of the bigger flops of recent times is Humane's AI pin. And it was supposed to be like sort of the first like, AI powered hardware and a new way to interact with artificial intelligence. And of course that company like launched and then quickly just sort of like flamed out, and there was a lot of critique, but given how fast AI is moving, and I know that like OpenAI is doing a bunch of like consumer hardware investments and experimentation.
I agree. I think I think AR hardware will be a thing. We just don't know what form will take off. And there are a bunch of people in this space right now, and it's going to be super easy, super interesting. Like True's an investor in one called Sandbar. We're really excited about. And, I saw a Friend launched like this week, and the reception was quite positive. I was surprised. And so, yeah, I think that it's like blue sky, and we'll just see what happens, even if the initial sort of reaction is kind of like, ick, we're being surveyed all the time. Your AI is listening. I think it'll be the future.
More to come.
You heard it here first.
All right, guys, great chat. See you next week.